Okay, hi, welcome. We're going to talk about star photos today, which I'm super stoked about. Happy May 4th to everyone. May the 4th be with you. Sorry, that is the only super lame nerd joke I will do in this video, I promise, maybe. Although it is Star Wars Day and I'm a huge nerd and Star Wars fan, so I'm stoked that we're talking about stars today, especially star photos with couples, which are some of the favorite photos that it's just such a fun genre of photography that I kind of stumbled into in the last couple of years, doing a lot of hiking elopements with couples. I would find myself hiking up in the dark with them and it would be so quiet and the stars would be out. And I just started saying, let's just try it. You know, I just kind of used the things I had with me already and kind of did some problem solving and trying and testing with a lot of different patient couples to figure out a way to make them happen like quickly and not too much effort and with only one exposure, so that it wasn't like a huge beast in my workflow, but it could just kind of fit with the rest of their gallery and with their experience. And so I started taking them with a lot of like sunrise hikes where we're hiking up in the dark, and then I've been a part of a lot of sunset hike elopements where we would stay up in whatever location we're shooting in until after sunset, and then we'd be hiking down in the dark. Then the stars would come out and be super beautiful. And so I just kind of like fell into this, and I kind of used my experience photographing couples and what I know about photographing couples in the daylight and how to do that, combined with kind of like a little side hobby, side interest in astrophotography, which I've always thought was incredibly cool and fun. I will preface this by saying I am not a hardcore professional astrophotographer. That is not my main genre or specialty. The people who are incredibly good at astrophotography with, you know, the crazy telescope lenses who, you know, spend 1 month like planning and getting that perfect shot. That's not what I'm doing here. My main focus is helping couples have amazing elopement days, and star photos just happened to become a part of that. So I'm going to share all of my tips and tricks and how I create the images that I do with couples in the dark with stars and headlamps, which I just kind of fell into and have just been practicing a lot. Astrophotography is a massive topic that if you wanted to dive into it, there are people who do amazing workshops and, you know, can tell all about the equipment. There's a lot of really cool apps out there for astrophotography. A couple that I've played with that I do find incredibly fun are Photo Pills and Photographers of Faramis. Both of those, you know, can really show you like the position of the Milky Way and exactly where it's going to be at what time, so you can like pre-compose shots with the Milky Way, with the landscape. Those are both incredible tools to set up awesome shots. Again, like my main focus is being an elopement photographer, and so I'm not like planning one shot for like weeks on end to make it like perfect, that one photo, because obviously there's a lot of other important things also to deal with on a couple's elopement day. But I have learned a lot of stuff along the way. So we'll start with just kind of some like astrophotography 101 basics, just the little like basic things you should probably know before you attempt taking star photos with couples. So first thing to realize is obvious, like light pollution makes a huge difference of whether you're able to see stars or not and how photos of stars turn out. So if you're in the middle of a city, obviously it's going to be very difficult to take star photos with couples. I think that's why I didn't really attempt this very much. When I was photographing big weddings, there was a handful of times that I was at a venue that was deep enough in the mountains and away from a town that we could see stars. But in general, like there's just usually so many lights that it's really hard to get away from, like without leaving the venue. So with elopements, it's really different because I found myself in really wild, like places deep in the backcountry late at night, which is really fun and really exciting. I absolutely love hiking in the dark. I think it's incredibly fun. I love doing trails at sunrise because you hike up in the dark and you don't see any of the trail really on the way up. All you can see is like 5 feet in front of you with your headlamp. You don't know what the view looks like. You can just feel that you're getting higher and higher, and then the sun starts to rise and you start to see the outlines of the peaks around you. You start getting really excited. I freaking love sunrise hikes. And then you get up there and you're at the most incredible view with the most amazing light right at sunrise. And then when you hike down, it's like you haven't even been on this trail before. It's a brand new trail. So I think it's incredibly fun to hike in the dark. But that's a side note. So essentially you need to get away from cities and towns and like light pollution in order to be able to take these photos. That's step number one. So there's several good resources online of like where you can look at light pollution maps, like One of them, I'll share my screen really quick so you can see, share screen. One of them that's really popular is this blue marble from NASA. They have kind of like the light pollution of the whole world and like where the cities are on a map. So that's pretty useful to be able to, in general, see like where are the places that you can see amazing stars and where are you going to be fighting with light pollution more. So I was zoomed into Fort Collins, which is where I live in Colorado. So obviously like in the big city, I mean, Fort Collins is not a big city. There's like 200,000 people in Fort Collins. But you can see there's not, you know, it wouldn't be really very possible to take star photos like in the middle of the city. I live up this road outside of town. So I live kind of west of Fort Collins, near Masonville in this little gap. There's a huge reservoir here. And I actually could see amazing stars from my house. So I could probably take some awesome star photos like from my backyard because I am just a little bit outside of the city. Obviously, if I look east, there is a decent chunk of light pollution over here across the reservoir. I can definitely see the lights of Fort Collins from my house at night. So, you know, obviously the deeper I went into the mountains, the easier it would be to take these star photos. So a lot of these star photos I've taken kind of in Rocky Mountain National Park and more in like this area of Colorado, like away from these little, you can see these little mountain towns everywhere. So this is a good map of just like a general baseline of like, you know, just aim for the dark blue parts and stay away from the shiny bits. I will say the best stars I've seen in my entire life are in this country over here in Namibia. If you look at it, there are like not even really big cities. Like Windhoek is the capital. That's here. It's like barely a blip on this map. There's like 200,000 people in this entire massive country. And I've never seen stars like that in my life. It was an unbelievable place to take star photos. I have never seen so many stars like that in my life. So basically, if you want to see really good stars, go to Africa, go to somewhere just in the middle of absolutely nowhere with no cities. So yeah, in the US and Europe, obviously, like I feel like looking at this map, that's where you see like so much concentration of light pollution, especially kind of eastern US. The West is a little more sporadic, so you can find places to take great star photos a little easier the further away you are from cities. So check light pollution, that's step number one. Basically what happens if you have too much light pollution is it just kind of fights the stars. And so instead of getting those real crystal clear stars, you get kind of weird hazy colors. They tend to look kind of like orange and yellow and red. That's kind of what light pollution looks like. You see it on the horizon line a lot. If you, like, even if you can't physically see a city, the light pollution, like even in Rocky Mountain National Park, you can see, if you're high enough on Trail Ridge Road, you can see the light pollution from Denver and you can see the light pollution from Fort Collins, like even, you know, 100 or so miles away, you can still see it. So it doesn't mean you can't take great star photos. Like several of the ones I'm going to show you like have light pollution in them, but the farther away that you can get from that, the better. So what else? In addition to light pollution, obviously like clouds and weather play a factor in whether you're able to take star photos or not. So when I am kind of planning and preparing with couples, I make sure that they understand, like, I cannot promise great star photos, because if it's completely clouded in, there's no stars to photograph. So one of those things that the star photos that I'm able to take that have been the best have been a bit of luck with the weather and been a really clear night, because like in addition to clouds, like smog and smoke can affect that. We have wildfires here in the summer that make the sky really smoggy. It makes for really epic sunsets, but it makes it really hazy, and the stars can be difficult to see at night if it's a really hazy day from wildfires or smoke. You can get that from like just normal pollution from big cities can affect your ability to take good star photos as well. So check the forecast, stay away from big cities, use like photo pills or Photographers Ephemeris to kind of try to pre-plan out, look at it in like geographically in the spot that you're at and figure out which direction the Milky Way is going to be. Like a rule of thumb, so it's like as far as the time of year to take these images, that is the best. So In the Northern Hemisphere, basically during the summer, the Northern Hemisphere is tipped towards the sun. So the Northern Hemisphere, like the core of the Milky Way, is most visible kind of from March to October. It's really best from like April to late July, like late July, early August is like, I've taken some of my favorite star photos during that time of year. That's kind of where you can see like the galactic center. For longer parts of the night, it kind of rises a bit earlier that time of year. So you can't really see the Milky Way very much in the Northern Hemisphere from like November to February. So it's not really a thing for winter elopements so much, but summer elopements is when I've taken these nighttime photos. So in general, the Milky Way is, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, is going to be on the southern side of the horizon. So if you are in the north, like wherever you are, look south, that's generally where you're going to see that galactic core. And it'll start to be kind of visible in like the southeast in the spring. It'll be kind of directly south in the summer. And it'll move more to like the southwest in the fall. And that's just kind of due to the rotation of the Earth, basically, compared to the rest of the galaxy. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite. Generally look for the Milky Way in the north. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you're also going to be looking towards the southern skies for the galactic core. The core is actually going to start to be visible in the southwest in the spring and more to the southeast in like the fall and the winter. So essentially you're still looking south, but you're looking for it at a different time of year if you're in the southern hemisphere. Sorry, I messed that up. So that's basically like where you should generally be looking for that Milky Way. If you're looking for Milky Way photos, obviously you can take great star photos even if the Milky Way isn't in it. But some of my favorite star photos with couples have had the Milky Way in it. So that's kind of fun to kind of know where it is, where it's going to be, like what time of night it's gonna rise, or what time early in the morning it's going to set, and where you're going to be able to look for it, and how that plays out with your route and what mountain you're climbing or whatever. You can kind of prepare that ahead of time with different apps. So check out PhotoPills and Photographer Faramus. They're like really powerful, super cool apps. Totally recommend them. So, what's up, Maddie? Okay, come here. What's up? You want to say hi? Come here. Finn wants to say hi, apparently. So what else? So planning around moon phases is a good idea. If you have a super bright moon, obviously that's going to affect your light pollution. It's going to be more difficult to see the stars during a full moon. I will say that one of my very favorite star photos ever with the Milky Way did also include like moon alpenglow, which I'll show in a second, explain what that is. So, and I have taken great star photos even with a full moon. Obviously, like my couples aren't necessarily planning their entire elopement days around like when is the perfect Milky Way shot or when is the full moon. They're just picking a date and an amazing location. And so I'm just trying to take, if they want star photos and it's a clear night, I'm going to be taking whatever star photos I can, even if Milky Way hasn't risen yet, or if it is a full moon, like you can still take photos with couples and stars in them, even if all those elements like aren't aligned perfectly. So I just have fun with these star photos, honestly. They're kind of a fun little puzzle. The settings are a little bit different every single time. So as far as preparing couples ahead of time, what's super helpful, the main thing that I explain to couples is that basically these photos take a long time to properly execute. It is super different than daylight photography. So in the daylight, if a couple, like if we're in one spot for 5 minutes, I can take 150 photos, probably. I won't deliver 150 photos from 5 minutes, but if I wanted to, I could get like a lot done in 5 minutes in the daylight. At nighttime, if I'm trying to take one really good star photo, like it's like one photo for 5 minutes with the setup, getting the settings quite right, getting all the pieces to work together, which I'll explain in a second. But essentially, it's like 5 to 10 minutes average for one really good photo. So I'll explain that again. I pulled together a gallery of some of my favorite star photos from the last couple of years. Basically, they just take a lot of time. So if a couple has said to me, like, we really love stars, if it's a clear night, like it's really important to us that we take some time to get some awesome star shots, I would explain that to them, like, okay, like per really awesome star shot, it's going to take like about 5 to 10 minutes to really, really get it. So if you want a handful of really good ones, like I need a minimum of a half an hour. Really, I've spent like an hour, hour and a half with couples in the dark playing with star photos. It takes a very patient couple. And so setting those expectations ahead of time, building it into the timeline, also having a plan B in case it's like completely clouded in or freezing cold, or it's just like not an option for whatever reason. Like, what are we gonna go do instead? Is there a place we can like build a campfire and like have a picnic by a campfire instead, have some drinks by a campfire? Is there something else that we can do, just so that if they're building an hour and a half of it into their timeline and they're paying me for that hour and a half, that even if star photos don't pan out, that there's something else to do. So setting those expectations ahead of time is super useful. So the gear that I use for taking photos of couples with stars is pretty simple. And I think it's simple because I didn't plan to take these before I started taking them. I just tried it with the gear that I already had on me, and I've kind of just stuck with this system because it's simple, it's non-complicated, it's fast to set up, it's lightweight, and I'm carrying my gear with me in mountains usually. And again, like my main focus of an elopement day is not astrophotography, it is like elopement photography. So if I can create great star photos with the gear I already have, which I feel pretty happy about what I've made even with this very simple setup, then I'm not going to overcomplicate something that doesn't need to be overcomplicated. So I've taken the majority of the star photos you've seen of mine on my Nikon D750. And I love this camera does a couple of great things that help with taking these photos of couples with stars. One is it has a really great dynamic range and it has awesome shadow recovery. So shadow recovery is key because I'm not taking these photos like at perfect exposure because a couple cannot stand still for that long. So I'm taking them pretty underexposed in camera and then pushing the shadows up a lot in post to get that detail back. So, so having a camera that has really good shadow recovery is key for these. I would not be able to take these shots without a D750 or a D850. I know Canon has some great cameras too. Some of them have good shadow recovery in general. So I've heard like Nikons have a little bit better shadow recovery. Canon shadows, from what I've played for, from what I've tested on like my presets on Canon profiles, they tend to get they go kind of like weird greenish in their shadows or reddish. Like they get this weird color cast to their shadows if you push them up too high. Nikon, you have to go to really extreme shadow pushing to get that. You kind of get like a red tint if you push it super, super far. But in general, like extremely flexible raw files. So I'm shooting in RAW, shooting underexposed, and I need to have a camera with a dynamic range and shadow recovery that's good enough to be able to push it up in post. The other thing that that helps with this camera a ton with nighttime star photos is its ISO capabilities, both on the D750 and I have a D850. I can crank it up to 5,000–6,000 ISO for these star photos, and yes, it's going to be grainy. It's going to be grainier than a daylight photo for sure. That's expected. It's not perfectly grain free, but it's not just like a noise disaster. Like it still looks really good. It can still be printed, still be blown up. And that helps a ton, especially when I'm not able to do like perfectly still 30-second exposures with couples, because no one can stand still for that long. And so even though that might be ideal for astrophotography, I'm bringing another element into this, and that's the human element of like a real couple who's standing still, and no one can do that for 30 seconds. It would be blurry. So we'll get into settings and I'll show you guys some images in just a second. So basically, this is the camera I use. Two other features on this camera that I use all the time for astrophotography is this tilt LCD screen, because so the first several times I took star photos, I did not have a tripod with me. I had the camera just resting on the ground and I was like propping it up with like sticks and rocks and things just to like get it level and get it stable. So in live view, it has this little level, so I can tell if the camera is straight or not, so that helps me get straight horizon lines even in the dark. And if the camera's laying on the ground, being able to look down at the LCD screen and be like, yeah, cool, like it's straight. You know, even though I tilt it, I'm like, okay, I can tell it's straight, I can tell where the horizon line is, I can prop it up with sticks and stuff, and I can still see what's going on with the LCD screen. So it's way too far to the ground for me to be looking through a viewfinder. I need it stable on the ground so that there's only one variable of movement in the situation, and that's my couple, not two. So I need to like have the camera mounted somewhere that it's not going to move. So the first several times I took these shots, I didn't have a tripod. So it was like, cool, I'll stick it on this rock or this tree, or probably not a tree, but but like the ground, and I'll like prop it up with something. Like I've stuck like an extra headlamp underneath the top of my lens, like ghetto rigged it for sure. And so being able to have live view is huge. I'll talk about how I focus these images in a second, but basically essentially I use live view because I'm not looking through the viewfinder, because usually the camera's low to the ground. I have been using a tripod recently, like since I started having a lot of requests for these photos from couples, and like should probably get a tripod. So the tripod that I use is this one from Amazon. It's a Joby Gorilla Pod made for SLRs. I really like it because it's probably, you know, only like 12, 15 inches long, and it just has these 3 pieces, and it just kind of folds down, and I just like stick it in the side of my day pack, and it fits in there. And I love that the legs are just, they can completely move them in any direction. It's super fast to set up. I don't have to like undo all the little chink, like, you know, lengthening every single leg and like getting it stable, and it's not wobbly around. It's just like pull it out, open up the legs, stick them on the ground, move the tripod till the camera is level. It's extremely fast to set up, which is why I like it. Because for hiking up, for taking these photos, hiking up in the dark or hiking down in the dark, they aren't the main focus of the entire day. I want to try to make it as easy and simple on my clients as possible. And so having this Joby tripod makes it easy. Also, if I'm on really uneven, weird terrain, it doesn't matter. Like the legs are flexible, and it's, you know, it's kind of hard to see what you're doing in the dark. So I can really just set this up by feel, which is why I really like it as a travel tripod and a hiking tripod. And it's not too heavy. I'm a huge fan of this tripod. So so my G750 with my Tilty LCD, the D850 also has one. The high dynamic range, shadow recovery, that tripod, or, you know, some like skills with a rock or on the ground. If you don't want to carry a tripod, you don't have to. And then how I'm lighting these images are all with headlamps. So all of the light that you've seen in any of the star photos that I've taken is just with headlamps. So I have 3 of these. These are from Black Diamond. These are Storm, as I believe the brand, and I think it's like 375 lumens, which is pretty good. It's pretty darn bright at night for hiking. Getting more than like 375 lumens from what I've seen requires usually like a really intense like headgear headlamp with like, you know, like multiple straps, because it's heavy and you can't just have one light mounted on your head because it would fall. So it has to be this like crazy contraption thing to get a lot more than that. So I've been really happy with these Black Diamond ones. The other reason I like them is they're fully adjustable. So this is like super bright, like, ooh, yeah, very bright. So it has like both lights on right now, and then it can go to like just one light on or both, or the center one. I can dim them. So I'm pressing and holding now, and I'm going from like completely dim to super bright, and then it flashes when it gets to the top or the bottom. So it's fully flexible. It goes, I can't remember like the lowest lumens, but it goes from super low, probably like 50 lumens, all the way up to like 375 and anywhere in between there. So I have a lot of control about the amount of ambient light being pushed out through these, which means I can be really flexible. So I have one on me. The couples have one on them. Usually they bring their own headlamps, but I have extras. And if I have an extra headlamp with me, I will bring it, because it's fun to just like put these different places, and I don't have to carry like a full blown flash, and I don't have to worry about triggers or setting up any of that in the dark. It's like we're already using headlamps to hike. Again, this concept was like born out of necessity because I didn't have flashes with me, because I wasn't planning on taking star photos until it happened. And I just was like, cool, like let's try a headlamp. Why not? So I've mostly used these to light these star photos. So I'll show some like tips and tricks with those. Essentially, the reason why I like them being dimmable is because I dim the headlamps all the way down if I'm taking photos with them on, because if they're fully bright, they just like, they totally compete with the stars, because I'm doing a long exposure and I want the stars to be the main focus of the image, not like this bright glaring headlamp. So being able to dim them all the way down is key. If like I've tried to take these photos when couples had headlamps that weren't dimmable, and it was super challenging to get the balance correct. So yeah, basically that. As far as lenses, the lenses that I've used the most for star photos are, probably my favorite one is my 24 millimeter 1.4 Nikon, because it's nice and wide. It lets in a ton of light because of the 1.4. So being able to shoot wide open with it and it being sharp is key. Probably my favorite star photos have been taken with that lens. I have taken photos with my 35 1.4 as well, if I want like a little tighter composition on it for whatever reason. And I have taken a handful with my 14 to 24 2.8. I don't always hike with that lens. It really depends on the location. There's a handful of locations I know like I need that 14 to capture this whole scene. So yeah, whatever kind of the widest, most open lens I have in my bag when I'm hiking for whatever reason is what I normally use. So that 24-1.4 is probably my go-to lens for these night photos with couples, and I'll explain why. So as far as setting up the shot with star photos and preparing the couple is, okay, so we've already gone over on their timeline that they need to be patient and that it's going to take like 5 minutes for one shot. And I just so kind of reiterating that to them on their day, saying, hey, you know, like, look, it's a clear night, like the stars look awesome. So, you know, bear with me for a little bit, keep your coats on. I'm just gonna be testing lighting for a few minutes here to get this right. And then we'll be ready to set up the shot. And then it's gonna require you holding still for like a solid minute. So does that sound like something you guys feel like doing? Yes or no? So seeing if they're up for the experience, again, preparing them, like thanking them for being super patient, not having them like take their coat off until like I'm ready to take the image, or maybe they won't take their coat off at all. So, and then, so preparing them for being patient. And then the second bit is about preparing them for being still. So, this takes a little bit of practice, because a lot of people, when you tell them like hold a pose and hold still, their instinct is to like flex all our muscles and like kind of muscle themselves into it. And what happens is like, one, they're actually shaking. They're actually not holding completely still if their muscles are flexed. And over a minute, you're going to get extremely tired and you're going to move and you're going to shake more and more and more. It's way harder to hold still if you're tense and if you're flexing versus you being completely relaxed. So the key to poses where couples can actually stand still, like mind-blowingly still for a long amount of time, is for them to be really comfortable and really relaxed. So it's about telling them, go ahead and stand up straight. Just kind of feel your bones like align on top of each other. Find that place in your stance that feels just right. You're not having to put a whole lot of effort into standing. Like relax any muscles that you don't need to have flex at all to stand. Find a place that you're really comfortable. If they're holding on to each other, just like find the most comfortable, most relaxed pose to stay in. And then instead of telling them to hold still, I tell them to focus on being really relaxed and breathing. So I do a lot of yoga and energy work and other things, and like I've kind of brought a little bit of that into my work and working with couples. But basically, it's a lot easier to hold still if you're not thinking about and focusing on holding still. You're just like focusing on each other and being relaxed. So basically, a lot of these shots have been instructing couples, okay, find an incredibly simple, like easy posture that's not requiring a lot of effort to stand really still. And then once I have fully set up the settings on the camera and I'm just asking them to stand still now, I would communicate it in a way by saying, okay, so just focus on your breathing, take really nice, long, slow, deep breaths, and go ahead and like focus on that one spot on the horizon line, or look at that specific star and just focus on breathing and just like feel like the stillness and calmness like in your body. Or maybe they'd be looking at each other. So it's just look at each other and just listen to each other breathing, feel super calm and relaxed, and like don't try to force holding still, just like feel the stillness happen to you as you get more and more relaxed. So that's key. That's helped couples stand still way longer and it be a more enjoyable experience for them, which is like all what I'm about creating for couples on their elopement day. Not like, damn, this lady like made me flex for 5 minutes straight and it sucked and they didn't even get a photo because it was blurry. So yeah, so that's a good tip for holding still. So Let's talk about focusing, and then I'll go ahead and like show you a whole bunch of camera settings. So the last kind of thing before we get into settings is how do you actually focus these photos? So that was definitely hard for me when I first started to figure out. So the trick that I've learned that works pretty well almost every time is, again, like I have my tilt LCD, and I talked about live view being super important. And I also talked about the fact that I have headlamps, and I have the couples holding headlamps, and they're kind of like my voice activated light stand, which I'll show you with some of these photos. Is basically I have like a headlamp on me, so I can have mine turned on, and I can be shining it at the couple if I'm close enough to them. If I'm not close enough to them to get something lit up enough in order to focus, I will say, okay, I'll hand one of them an extra headlamp, or tell them brighten your headlamp all the way, shine it on his or her body, shine it on your partner's body who's right next to you. So it's like really definitely see it now in the LCD. So I'll turn the camera on, and we'll be in live view mode. And that red box right there is, my memory card's full apparently, but that red box right there is what I'll be focusing on. A lot of people don't know this, and this is such a cool trick. You can zoom in live view. So if I'm like, let me see if I can demonstrate this. This is gonna be weird. Ready? Okay, so if I'm trying to focus on my own eyeball, let's say, if I'm trying to focus on my own eyeball and I'm in live view and I wanna zoom in, so I can zoom in, and then I can use my focus button, which I use back button focus, and that helps a ton with star shots because it essentially enables me to like nail the focus and then recompose, or I like change the shot and then take the shot without it messing up the focus. So my focus button is not here on my camera, it's here. So back button focus I think helps me a ton with the way that I shoot, with all of my poses in the daylight that are, you know, movement and flowy, and it's like capturing those in between moments. And while people are moving quickly towards me or away from me, being able to get shots in focus all the time, that's another topic. But really live view, back button focus helps a ton with that, because essentially like this finger and whatever it's focused on, as far as where the focus point is in the viewfinder or on the back of the LCD, whatever that focus point is on at the moment that I press this button, the camera, you can hear it maybe, is actively working on like focusing on that, because I'm in continuous focus mode. So pressing and holding, it's wherever I move it, it's working on actively trying to focus on that while I'm there. And then this is purely just a shutter at that point. So it's purely, it's purely like ready for me to take. It's purely ready for me to take photos. It has nothing to do with something being in focus or not. So it's just focusing. This is just focus, and this is just shutter. So instead of this being halfway down, so in order to take a photo, my camera is going to try to refocus again, which would mess up my focus if I'm taking photos in complete darkness. This is just a trigger at that point, really, and this is the focus. So how that works then, how this all comes together. So you tell the couple, okay, shine it on your partner's body so it's nice and bright. I'm in live view, and I, you know, can see on my screen, okay, like let's pretend like what's in that red box is like that person's body. And I go ahead and zoom in because I might be really far away, and I make sure it's perfectly in focus. And then I press my focus button, and it's gonna work like on focusing right there. And I'm like way zoomed in, but I can still see like, yeah, I've nailed it. It's like perfectly in focus. And I can leave it right there, let go of the focus button, and I can zoom back out and see and like recompose and like change anything that I need, make sure it's in good composition, make sure my horizon line is straight or whatever. And then I can like take the shot, hit the shutter button, and it will take the photo without messing up the focus that I just got right. So I have them shine it on his or her partner's body so I can nail the focus. The distance then from me to the couple isn't changing, so I can, you know, tilt or move slightly like here, and I might be 25 feet away from them, so it's not gonna really affect them, you know, it's not gonna affect like where that like field of focus is, because I'm not like drastically moving toward or moving away from them, because my camera is sitting on the ground or on a tripod, it's not moving. I'm instructing them to like stay still where they are, which is different, very different than how I take photos in the daylight, where couples are really not standing still ever. So then I say, okay, now we'll do something else with the headlamp. So like dim it all the way down and like do something else with it. And I'll kind of show what some things you can do with those headlamps to light up the shot can be. So it's like light, focus, change the light, recompose, shoot again, and then test, and then retest, and then take a few more shots, and then retest, and then have the couple stand still by relaxing and being in a really comfortable spot. And you take it until you can get a really good one, and then you try something else, and you retest, and you refocus. Almost every single one of these star photos I ever take has different camera settings. There is no like one size fits all. So I have like go-to settings that I then like tweak from there. So let's go ahead and jump into this little like Lightroom gallery I pulled together of a whole bunch of star photos, which you can see my settings. I have this like pulled up, so share. Cool, so this is a Lightroom gallery full of star photos that I've taken in the last little bit. So we'll go over some of these and like how I set them up and what the settings were. So this one, let's look at this. So if I pull up the settings here, it looks like I was on my 24mm 1.4, and I was shooting at 4 seconds f2 ISO 5000. So it was actually pretty close to my go-to starting settings. My go-to starting settings with star photos are 1.8, ISO 2500, and 4 seconds. That's where I start with these couples photos with stars. And why do I start there? Because in general, most couples, I've found it difficult for a couple to sit or stand still for longer than 4 seconds. It's like pretty rare that that happens. So 4 seconds is kind of like, there's kind of a hard barrier there at one end of like how still a couple can actually stand. And so that's important to, you know, like you cannot, a couple generally cannot stand still for 15, 20, 30 seconds. Like a lot of people take star photos with those really long exposures. But if you crank up the ISO enough and you're shooting wide open enough, then you don't need to have them stand still for that long. So that's like the key of how do you get couples still with these star photos? Well, I'm pushing the limits of my equipment here, really, is the bottom line. I'm shooting these photos fairly underexposed. So I didn't pull the RAWs for every single one of these images, but I have some RAWs pulled for some of them. So here's another one. Here we go. ISO 2500, f1.6, 4 seconds. I got lucky. This shot was like pretty much my normal go-to settings. I didn't have to tweak it a ton. So the original one, sorry, oops. The original photo, what it looks like is that. So that's the RAW, that's how it looked in the back of my camera, this image. And so I knew it would edit up just fine because if you look at the histogram, let me reset these settings. So this is what the histogram originally looks like, and that's what a lot of these star photos histogram look like in my camera, is all of the data is in like the left 50% of the screen. There's a little bit of like clipped blacks here that are not going to be fully recoverable, but there's not too many. Like there is still like that normal, like there's still enough of like that normal histogram hump, which is like how most normal photos are exposed. There's like a hump in the middle with the midtones. So like the midtones are not, basically I haven't like smushed all of the midtones and clipped all the blacks completely. How these histograms work, which when I'll stop sharing for a second because I want to show this. So when I'm shooting, my default playback menu is always the histogram playback menu, which is what I'm always looking for as far as being able to tell, like just with a quick glance, like, am I clipping any blacks? Am I clipping any whites? I especially on Nikon do not want to clip any whites. I do not want to blow the highlights. And what I mean by that is in this histogram, I do not want like a huge data stack, like all the way up here to the right side of the histogram. I think it might be backwards for you guys, but the right side of the histogram. And that would mean like I've clipped those highlights, I've blown them, like there's no data there. I can't recover that in post. Nikons are way more flexible on the other side. So I'm comfortable having some data stacked up on the, like the black side of the histogram spectrum. Essentially what histogram is like a graph of all of the tones in the tonal range in the image, and then you stack them on top of each other. So basically sharing my screen again, what this histogram means is, for this original photo, is that like this hump and image means there's like a lot of tones in this area here, and like there's less and less and less as you go to the right, and really like there's no tones that are really brighter than like about 50% gray. So that's essentially what that histogram is saying. And that's like the histogram that it looks like in the back of my camera when I'm shooting these star photos. So that's how I can tell, even though this image like on my LCD would look like half of it was pure black, I can tell from the histogram when I'm looking at the preview that it's not, that I actually do have data there. I'm gonna be able to recover it in post. And you know, this is what I was able to bring it back to in post. So yeah, there are some of these darker parts of the image that probably are completely clipped that I can't use, but it looks fine. So yeah, so as far as editing these star photos, you can see in general, it's kind of a game of lowering contrast, because this original image, if you go back to it, you can see you have like really dark shadows, and then you have like the bright light behind them. So I had Marissa, she was holding a headlamp in her left hand, and I instructed her to like point it back towards them. So that's giving them a little bit of rim lighting with the headlamp. And so that's the only artificial light in this shot. The rest of the light is coming from the stars and coming from the moon. So that light on those peaks in the background is moon alpenglow, which I didn't even realize was there while I was shooting these. It was only when I was editing them that I noticed that had happened, which was pretty lucky. So essentially, the moon is rising behind me as I'm taking this shot. The moon is rising behind me back towards the left. And I have shot a lot of alpenglow at sunrise and sunset with the sun, but it didn't really occur to me until I had taken this photo that it actually happens with the moon. And why does that happen, and like what is alpenglow? So essentially, like the sun emits like pretty pure white light, and the moon does as well, because it's just reflecting the sun in general. And so when the moon is, when the sun is like just about to rise or after the sun has set, basically light can bend, and it is the wavelengths that are longer, the less powerful wavelengths in the visible light spectrum are on like the warmer end of the spectrum. So that's like your reds, your oranges, and your yellows just have longer wavelengths and less energy, so they can bend around things easier. So basically, when the sun is about to rise over the curved surface of the earth, like the first thing is like some of those warm light rays will like literally bend over the surface of the earth, and they will hit the top of the peak of whatever that mountain is first. As the sun is rising. So those like pink photos of mountains at sunrise, it's caused by that like bending of the light around the curvature of the earth. And so it changes colors every 2 seconds, because as the sun is actively rising and the earth is spinning 1,000 miles an hour, like the color of the light is changing. So it goes from like bright red to like orange to yellow to white within, you know, just like an hour. It changes, you know, or a half an hour. It changes dramatically very quickly. The same thing happened with this moon alpenglow. This only looked like this for like 2 minutes. It happened to be the exact same time we'd stopped to take star photos, because we saw the Milky Way come out. This was after an all-day hiking elopement up this awesome mountain pass. And so we were all really tired. Honestly, I only had a few minutes to take these photos. And so like they were kind of cold and tired, which is completely understandable because it was a long day. And so I said, okay, let's just stop. Let's just try to get one photo with this Milky Way. And it was just a lot of quick thinking. I would have preferred to like gotten the mountains above them, but my tripod's so low to the ground. That's like the one downside of the Joby, is I can't really get like, I don't have a ton of options with composition, because my camera's pretty much always low to the ground. But it was low to the ground, so I decided to make it really low and just have the horizon cut through the middle of their bodies instead of their heads. And that kind of worked out, because then I kind of aligned the core of the Milky Way with their heads. And I'm really happy with how this one turned out. So the headlamp that she's shining back onto them is kind of bouncing off their bodies, and that's lighting up the ground here as well. That's what this light is coming from. So it's like that light on her dress and her and their faces, that's all coming from one single headlamp that she's holding in her hand. And then the moon, the light on the mountains behind them, that is alpenglow from the moon about to rise. The moon is reflecting that same mostly white light in the visible spectrum. And it's like basically making those mountains glow, which is so cool. So that just happened to really work out. I only really took one shot of this. Like I took 10 in a row and I picked the one that was the most in focus, but I really only took like one shot. I think when I was practicing and like setting up my test shots, this was one that I took. So you can see I had slightly different settings. I had my ISO a little, lower, and it was also 4 seconds, and I was at 2.0. And then I kind of liked the idea of, okay, if I got a little closer to them and shot a little more wide open, like it would actually almost have like blurred out stars in the background. So basically editing these, I'm usually lowering the contrast, lowering the highlights and the whites, pushing up the shadows to kind of even it out. So like bump up the shadows and make sure I'm not blowing out the highlights. I'm trying to like balance those when I'm post-processing these. Also, generally like bumping up like the clarity slider or the dehaze slider can make those stars really pop out. You don't want to go overboard with it because it can do really weird things to people's skin. I think I actually have a gradient filter on this image here, which is like extra dehazing and extra pushing up the whites to essentially make the stars in the sky pop out more. So if I turn that off, that's what that image looks like without that extra just quick gradient filter on those stars. So that's a good trick for editing these star photos. Cool, let's look at a few more and see what the settings were on all of these. So this one, I didn't have a tripod for this. I remember that. I was perching it on a rock, and this was with my 24 millimeter, 4 seconds, f2.0, ISO 5000. So they were sitting, and that enabled them to sit still even longer. He has a headlamp on his head, which if you have a 4-second exposure and there's a little bit of humidity or something in the air for that light to bounce off of, you can kind of start to see that little light ray from a headlamp if they hold still enough. So there's a few images in here where you'll see that. I included a few shots that were just stars. So like I just wanted to take a dope ass picture of the stars. We were hiking on a trail. You couldn't see any of this in the dark. It was completely black, like the image. Like with your eyes, you could see that pretty much. And so it's fun to take star photos because it kind of blows couples' minds of like, hey, you want to see what the stars look like tonight? And you take this photo, take this 13-second exposure, show it to them in the back of their camera, like, what? Whoa. And then they might be a little more likely to hold still for a few star photos with them in it once they see it. It's a pretty cool trick to have as a photographer. And then so I have actually even handheld star photos of couples. So I can handhold, I've noticed I can handhold up to about a half a second, pretty still, pretty steady. So I didn't have a tripod, and this was a quick shot. They were just standing off the side of the trail, like just talking for a bit. And you know, I was just watching them, and they just looked at each other, and I thought it was a cool photo. I was like, guys, hang out there for a second. And I just like threw some settings onto my camera and got it focused on them and took the shot, and I just loved it. And so you can even see the stars in this image, even though I was only at like 0.4 second exposure. So I'm pushing the rest of the limits of my camera. That ISO is cranked up. I'm shooting wide open so that I can just letting as much light into the camera as possible, because I can't always have a super long exposure. So this is the same thing. This is a 1/4 second. This is also a candid taken at night with headlamps. And you can still see the stars. We were getting closer to sunrise at this point. The closer and closer you get to sunrise, the less stars you can see. This one, I played with a tiny bit of light painting. This was a longer exposure. This is probably like one of the longest ones I've done with a couple, but they could actually hold still for that long. They were holding still for 13 seconds. I was on my 14 to 24 millimeter lens, and this shot is taken with the same one. I wanted like a wider view of it. The cool thing is, so this shot and this shot are actually the exact same location. The difference is this was like a full moon. All of the light on the rocks and them and the mountains back here in the snow, that's all moon. It was bright, freaking clear, full moon. And this was no moon, so it was pretty dark. So you can see a lot more stars, but there's a lot less definition. You couldn't see any of this in the dark. You couldn't see the outline of that mountain over there. I knew it was there because I've hiked this trail before. So I was like, guys, trust me, watch this, like sit there and then, you know, have your headlamps on. So I got both of the beams of the headlamps, and I noticed, so yeah, these images are 10-second exposures and 13-second exposures. And they were able to hold that still because they were sitting down. It's a little bit easier to hold really still and be super relaxed holding if you're sitting versus standing. And I did a tiny bit of light painting because remember, there's no ambient light. There's no moon at all. So I did just like a quick little sweep with my headlamp on really dim. I was like, whoosh, really quick, getting the rocks and the backs of them so I could see just a little bit of detail. And how did I know to do that? It was just from practicing and from playing. It was like, man, it is so dark out here. Even having my ISO at 5,000, even having this 14 to 24 millimeter lens wide open at 2.8 and a 13-second exposure, it is still freaking too dark. I gotta do something. I gotta add a little bit of light somehow. I like the idea of them having light beams on their heads, so I'm just gonna do a painting on them, and it worked out. Really, this is more like cooking is kind of what I related to than anything else. It's like, just sprinkle a little bit of this and a little bit of that and just like taste it and like try it out and like do it a few more times. And, you know, luckily I've had a lot of patient couples that have, you know, been interested in letting me practice this over a long time. And this photo is really fun because it has doggies in it. So this was one that I was on a tripod, but the reason why I'm at 1/5 of a second was because these puppers, like you can't instruct a pupper to stay perfectly still, not moving an inch for 4 seconds. That's pretty unrealistic. There's actually a little blur back here, which is like a 9-month-old puppy. They had two Bernese Mountain Dogs, and one of them was like 9 months old, a little baby. He was really blurry and just like moving all over the place. This older pup was a little bit better at sitting still. So yeah, and you can still see stars in this image. I know it's, you know, it's not as like star filled as some of these other ones. And when I was able to do a slightly longer exposure, you could see more. This is like 2.5 seconds. The dogs are pretty blurred, but it's fun. And then we're getting closer to sunrise. You can start to see light on the horizon line here. Here I'm at 1.3 seconds, ISO 5,000 wide open. I'm shooting these with a 35. And then really close to sunrise, you can start to see that happening. We were closer to the summit of the 13er for this one. So I'm back down at a 25th of a second, still up pretty high ISO. I'm hand holding this because I wanted that specific composition with the little pupper silhouettes. And she was like, it's like, oh, just like look back at him, because I wanted her headlamp to kind of give him some cool rim lighting. So I love that shot a lot. And you can see like I was pushing these shadows quite a bit because even in an icon, they're going a little red in the corners, which is fine. So these were super fun star shots I took in the Great Sand Dunes that were a blast because it was in August and it was a beautifully, beautifully clear night. And dunes give like some really fun, like compositional opportunities. Like I can like climb a dune and get a higher view. And so I'm not just stuck like with a low view always of the stars. So I could kind of play with like the composition a little bit more with these. So for this one, like there's a headlamp on the ground lighting up the dune behind them, which is cool. And it was really cloudy to start out with on the side. I didn't think we would be able to take great star photos. It was completely clouded in, but it just started clearing more and more. If you look at the timestamp on these images, we started taking them at like 8:40, and then we didn't finish taking them. I mean, the last one that I have pulled up here is what, like 9:50. So I think spent like a solid hour and a half taking these photos, and it was really fun hanging out in the sand dunes after dark. There was some light pollution, even in a national park. Like you can see there's like a tiny little town over there, and like this is what light pollution looks like in images and why it kind of ruins stars, especially if it bounces off of clouds. But it was still super fun. I still love these images, even though like it's not perfectly not light polluted. And so there's a headlamp behind them in that one lighting up the dune, and like you can see the dune ridges, it was making it look really cool. I had the headlamp dimmed as much as possible, otherwise it would be way too bright compared to the stars. So you can put headlamps like behind a couple to add that kind of fun rim lighting. I like this one a lot. So she's wearing a headlamp 2, I believe, and I had like 2 headlamps lighting up the dunes, which was fun. So you can kind of see a little bit more of the landscape and what's going on. So yeah, again, she has one on her head, and you can see the stars were amazing out there. It was just cloudy. So as the clouds started to move away, we're like, let's just keep taking photos because this is still super fun. So, oh, I'm gonna turn back on my settings so you can see these. So here we go, ISO 5000, 3 seconds, 1.4, 3 seconds, 1.4, 8000. So, you know, I have my ISO pretty cranked up, and yeah, it's not a perfectly not grainy image. It isn't, you know, this is not like the standard of graininess I would have during the daylight, but you know, a couple can't hold that pose any stiller than they can. And so the only other option is to do like crazy composites, which you can totally do. I choose to just keep it simple and have fun with it. So that is what I'm doing here. These are all single exposures. And so there we go. I just turned it up at the sky and did a 15-second exposure of just the Milky Way that night, which as it was peeking out behind the clouds, which was pretty beautiful. And then I wanted to try to like get them with the Milky Way, and it was like at a weird angle, and it wasn't like in the direction of the dunes. Dunes kind of like, they kind of go one direction depending on the wind, and it didn't like really line up very well. So we had to like stand on the side of the dune to get these. And I decided to see what it was like to point a headlamp more towards the camera. Usually I try to keep the headlamps pointed away from the camera, but I kind of like that one. It just makes a little extra little flair for funsies. And yeah, there's a headlamp beam coming out of her head. It might be a little weird, but it's fun. I think it's fun, and couples love these. So I threw this one in there. I know it's not stars, but it's just an example of my settings for like headlamp photos in general when I'm just hiking up with them in the dark. Because it's pretty similar. It's just I let the headlamps be a little bit brighter because they already are. And then because I'm hand holding it, it's like my shutter speed is cranked up so that it's not blurry. Here's another star photo of the couple on a pretty cloudy night, so you only see a few stars poking through. This is only at 1 second. That's a crazy Milky Way. That was 10 seconds, and it was like me showing the couple that photo that let me take these 2 photos. And then after the moon popped out, I just like took a photo of the moon. So that 7200 2.8 can take decent shots of the moon. I was cropped in, but that was fun. So yeah, so essentially what have we gone over? We've gone over gear, we've gone over settings. So my go-to settings again are like 4 seconds, ISO 2500, 1.8 f-stop. I shoot underexposed so that I know I can bump it up in post because I'm pushing the limits of the couple and my camera to get this all to happen in one exposure. So like ways of like tweaking settings if something is off. So if a couple if they can't hold still 4 seconds or 4 seconds, then it's just like, okay, let's try 2 seconds. And then that means that I have to, okay, let's just try it for 2 seconds. And if they can only hold still for 2 seconds, that means I need to crank my ISO higher. If I'm at 1.8, I'm gonna go down to 1.4. I'm just gonna try to let as much light in as possible. If I want a 35 millimeter, I'm gonna switch to a 24 millimeter. That's gonna let a little bit more light in, and I'm just gonna do the best I can. So if there's like too much ambient light versus stars, like if the headlamps and whatever light I'm using are just completely drowning out the stars, and like I'm like blowing the highlights on those more lit up parts of the image and I still can't see any detail in the stars, then it's just how can we lower the ambient light? So if you don't have a headlamp that's dimmable, I've like covered a headlamp with a hand before, or like covered it partially in a jacket, or just like covered it or buried it in the sand a little more, or whatever I need to do to like occlude that light more so that it's less ambient light. Make a little bit longer exposure so that will like bring out the detail in the stars more without letting the ambient light that I'm adding to the shot like blow out the highlights. If it's just too dark in general, if I'm looking at that histogram and it's like completely smushed to the left-hand side and it's like all clipped black and there's no doubt I'm not gonna be able to pull that back in post, then it's longer exposure, more wide open, or higher ISO is really only 3 options. So pick one of them, whatever is gonna work. And with editing these, like I showed, It's about lowering the contrast and pushing the shadows. So it's about balancing those kind of brighter highlights from whatever added light you might be adding to the shot with pushing up the shadows, and then kind of playing with those like clarity and dehaze sliders, and like a gradient filter or a brush can like bring out more detail in those stars. So those are my very favorite tips about how to photograph photos of couples with stars. And I hope to see more people taking these images because I think they're incredibly fun. The more you take them and the more you show them, the more couples request them. And I absolutely love taking these star photos. It's a fun time, especially if you keep it nice and relaxed for the couple and just say like, why don't you just sit there and breathe? Like I have had one of the couples that I did this with on their elopement, like mention it to me specifically in their review of like, man, it was just so fun that we paused on the way up on our sunrise hike and we just sat down and looked at the stars and breathed with each other for 10 minutes while Maddie took these photos that were mind-blowing. We didn't even really know that were happening, and she just had us sit there and breathe and just relax and soak it in. It was really fun. So yes, it's time consuming. Yes, you need a patient couple, but you can craft the experience in a way that it feels fun and it's like an added, and it's an addition to the experience rather than detracting from. I think it's super fun. Happy May 4th. Enjoyed taking tons of photos with stars. Thanks so much for all of your questions in the group. If you're not in the Facebook group, Weddings and Wanderlust, go ahead and request to join. It's super fun in there. We have all topics about adventure elopements and getting into doing these kind of fun outdoor photos with couples more. So thank you so much for the great questions, guys, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.